Fear is a strange companion. It walks beside you when you see someone you'd like to talk to, whispering reasons why you should stay silent. Your heart races, your palms sweat, and suddenly the simple act of saying hello feels like crossing a battlefield. But what if the very strategies that shaped kingdoms and toppled empires could help you cross that invisible divide? What if the mind that wrote The Prince had something profound to teach us about conquering the fear that keeps us isolated? Niccolò Machiavelli lived in a world of constant danger, where a wrong word can mean exile or death, where leaders rose and fell with brutal swiftness. Yet he understood something fundamental about human nature that transcends the politics of Renaissance Italy. He understood that fear, when properly understood, becomes a tool rather than a prison. And today, we're going to explore how his wisdom can transform the way you approach conversations, especially those conversations that make your voice shake and your confidence crumble. Let's start with a truth that Machiavelli understood better than almost anyone. The fear you feel is not about the other person. It's about you. When you see someone you'd like to talk to and your stomach tightens, you're not actually afraid of her. You're afraid of what her rejection might say about you. You're afraid of the story you'll tell yourself if the conversation doesn't go perfectly. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But he also understood that fear is most powerful when it's acknowledged and directed. Your fear of rejection is real, but it's also pointing you towards something important. It's showing you that you care about connection, that you value authentic interaction. The question is not how to eliminate fear, but how to act despite it. Consider how Machiavelli approached strategy. He never assumed perfect conditions. He never waited for the ideal moment when everything aligned perfectly. He understood that fortune favors the bold, but more importantly, he understood that fortune favors those who prepare and then act. When you wait for the perfect moment to approach someone, when you rehearse the perfect opening line in your head until the opportunity passes, you're violating a fundamental principle of effective action. There is no perfect moment. There is only the moment you choose to act. But here's where Machiavelli's wisdom becomes especially valuable. He didn't advocate reckless action. He advocated informed action, strategic action, action based on understanding rather than impulse. Before you approach any conversation, you need to understand what you're actually trying to achieve. And here's where many people go wrong. They approach conversations with women as if they're trying to win something, as if they're trying to prove their worth or extract validation. This is the mindset of someone who has already lost because they've given away their power before they've even spoken. Machiavelli understood that true power comes from self-possession, from knowing your own value independently of others' reactions. When you approach a conversation with the goal of genuine connection rather than validation, everything changes. You're no longer performing. You're no longer trying to be impressive. You're simply being curious about another human being. This shift in intention is subtle but transformative. It takes the pressure off you to be perfect and instead creates space for authenticity. Think about the last time you talked to someone you didn't find intimidating. Maybe a colleague or a friend. You probably didn't overthink every word. You didn't worry about awkward silences or perfect phrasing. You just talked. The conversation flowed because you weren't trying to control the outcome. You were simply present. This is the state you need to cultivate, and Machiavelli's principles can help you get there. One of Machiavelli's most misunderstood concepts is his discussion of virtù, which doesn't mean virtue in the moral sense, but rather capability, adaptability, and strength of character. In the context of conversation, virtù means being able to read the situation, adapt to the moment, and maintain your composure regardless of how things unfold. It means having the inner strength to be genuine rather than hiding behind a persona. Too often, when people approach conversations they're nervous about, they put on a mask, they try to be funnier, cooler, more interesting than they actually are. This always backfires, because masks are exhausting to maintain and people can usually sense inauthenticity. Machiavelli would tell you to focus on what you can control. You cannot control whether someone will like you. You cannot control whether the conversation will lead to friendship or romance or anything at all. You can only control your own actions, your own presence, your own authenticity. When you fully accept this, the fear begins to lose its grip, because fear thrives on the illusion that you can control outcomes if you just do everything perfectly. But perfection is a trap. Authenticity is freedom. Let's talk about the actual moment of approach, because this is where fear often reaches its peak. You see someone you'd like to talk to. Your mind immediately starts generating obstacles. She looks busy. She's probably not interested. You'll sound stupid. What if her friends judge you? What if she's in a relationship? Machiavelli understood that the mind generates these obstacles as a form of self-protection, but he also understood that safety and growth rarely coexist. The person who never risks anything, never achieves anything. Here's a strategic principle that Machiavelli would appreciate. Act before you're ready, not recklessly, but decisively. The more time you give yourself to think about approaching someone, the more elaborate your fear becomes. Fear needs time to build its case, but action destroys hesitation. The moment you start moving, the moment you commit to the approach, something shifts. Your body's chemistry changes. Adrenaline becomes fuel rather than paralysis. You enter a state of flow where your instincts take over and the overthinking stops. But what do you actually say? This is where people often trap themselves with the search for the perfect opening line. Machiavelli would find this amusing because he understood that success rarely depends on perfect execution. It depends on genuine intention and adaptability. The specific words you use matter far less than the energy behind them. If you approach someone with genuine curiosity and respect, almost any opening works. A simple hello, a genuine compliment about something specific you noticed, a question about something in the environment you're both sharing. The content is less important than the authenticity. And here's something crucial that Machiavelli understood about human nature. People respond to energy and presence more than they respond to words. Think about the leaders Machiavelli analyzed. The successful ones weren't always the most eloquent. They were the ones who commanded presence, who believed in their own legitimacy, who didn't apologize for taking up space. When you approach a conversation, your body language, your tone, your confidence, all these communicate more than your actual words. If you approach someone while simultaneously apologizing for existing, while hunching your shoulders and speaking in a tentative voice, you've already undermined yourself. But if you approach with calm confidence, with the assumption that you have every right to initiate a friendly conversation, people respond differently. This doesn't mean being aggressive or entitled. Machiavelli made a crucial distinction between force and power. Force is crude and often backfires. Power is subtle, confident, and ultimately more effective. In conversation, power means holding your ground emotionally while remaining respectful of the other person's boundaries. It means being comfortable with silence, being comfortable with the possibility of rejection, being comfortable with your own presence in the interaction. Let's address rejection directly, because this is often the core fear. Machiavelli lived in a world where rejection often meant death or exile, yet he continued to write, to advise, to engage with the world. He understood that rejection is information, not judgment. When someone isn't interested in continuing a conversation, they're not rejecting your fundamental worth as a human being. They're simply indicating that this particular interaction at this particular moment isn't aligned with their desires or availability. This might be about timing, mood, personal circumstances, or simply a lack of compatibility. None of these things diminish you. In fact, Machiavelli would argue that the ability to handle rejection gracefully is one of the most powerful traits you can develop. When you can accept a no with equanimity, when you can wish someone well and move on without bitterness or self-recrimination, you've achieved something remarkable. You've proven to yourself that your worth is not contingent on any single person's response. This self-possession is magnetic. It's the opposite of neediness. And neediness is one of the most repellent qualities in human interaction. Here's where Machiavelli's strategic thinking becomes especially useful. He understood that successful leaders diversified their risks, that they didn't stake everything on a single gamble. Apply this to social interaction. If you place all your hopes on one conversation, you create unbearable pressure. But if you develop the habit of initiating conversations regularly, of seeing each interaction as practice and possibility rather than make or break, you transform your entire relationship with social anxiety. Rejection becomes less painful when it's one data point among many rather than the defining moment of your social life. Machiavelli also understood the importance of learning from experience. After every significant interaction, he would analyze what worked and what didn't, not to torture himself with regrets, but to improve his future strategies. You can do the same. After you approach someone, regardless of the outcome, take a moment to notice what you learned. Did you speak too quietly? Did you maintain eye contact? Did you listen as much as you talked? Were you genuinely curious, or were you performing? This kind of honest self-assessment, done without self-judgment, accelerates your growth exponentially. But here's something that often gets overlooked in discussions of confidence and conversation: the importance of having a life worth talking about. Machiavelli understood that leaders who had nothing to offer except their title were weak leaders. Similarly, if your entire focus is on talking to women, if you have no interests, no passions, no life outside of romantic pursuit, you have nothing genuine to share in conversation, the most attractive quality you can develop is not a perfect opening line or flawless social skills. It's being someone who is genuinely engaged with life, someone who has interests and experiences and perspectives that come from actually living rather than just thinking about relationships. This might seem like a detour from the topic of overcoming fear, but it's actually central to it. Fear often stems from a lack of genuine self-worth. When you know you have value, when you know you have interesting things to share, when you know you're living a life that matters to you, the fear of rejection diminishes, because you know that whether this particular conversation goes well or not, you're still living your life, still growing and experiencing and becoming. Machiavelli wrote about the importance of appearing confident even when you're not, but he also understood that appearance built on nothing eventually crumbles. True confidence, the kind that allows you to approach conversations without crippling fear, comes from genuine self-development. It comes from taking care of your physical health, from pursuing your interests with passion, from building real friendships, from achieving things that matter to you. When you have this foundation, conversations become less crucial to your sense of self. They become pleasant possibilities rather than desperate necessities. Let's talk about body language and presence. Because Machiavelli understood that nonverbal communication often matters more than words. When you approach someone, your body should communicate openness and confidence. Stand up straight, not because you're trying to appear tall, but because good posture reflects self-respect. Make eye contact, not in an aggressive, staring way, but in the natural way you'd look at someone you're genuinely interested in. Smile if it's genuine. Don't force it. Speak clearly and at a normal volume. Don't rush your words, because rushing communicates anxiety. Take your time. You have every right to exist in this space and to initiate this conversation. One of Machiavelli's most powerful insights was about the importance of reading situations accurately. In conversation, this means paying attention to signals. Is the person making eye contact? Are they turning toward you or away? Are they giving short answers that close off conversation? Or are they asking questions back? These signals tell you whether to continue the conversation or to politely exit. There's nothing weak about recognizing when someone isn't interested and gracefully moving on. In fact, this demonstrates the kind of social intelligence that Machiavelli valued highly. But here's something important. Often, initial hesitation doesn't mean lack of interest. It means uncertainty. Many people, when approached by a stranger, have a moment of wariness. This is natural and healthy. Your job is not to bulldoze through this hesitation with aggressive persistence. Your job is to create a sense of safety through your demeanor and respect. If someone seems uncertain, you might acknowledge it directly with something like, "I know this is a bit random, but I noticed you and wanted to say hello." This kind of self-awareness and transparency can disarm initial wariness. Machiavelli understood that timing matters. There are better and worse moments to approach someone. Someone rushing to catch a train is not in the right state of mind for a conversation. Someone deeply engaged in work or conversation with friends might not appreciate an interruption. This doesn't mean you should never approach anyone, but it means you should be thoughtful about when and how you do it. Strategic timing increases your chances of a positive response, not because you're manipulating anything, but because you're being respectful of context. Here's a principle that Machiavelli would absolutely endorse. Preparation reduces fear. You don't need to script out entire conversations, but you can prepare yourself mentally and emotionally. Before going somewhere where you might meet someone, you can set your intention. You can remind yourself that you're going to be friendly and open, that you're going to approach conversations with curiosity rather than attachment to outcomes, that rejection is acceptable and even expected sometimes. This mental preparation creates a foundation that makes the actual moment of approach less overwhelming. Let's address something that often goes unspoken: the fear of being seen as creepy or inappropriate. This fear can be paralyzing, but Machiavelli would tell you that the antidote is clear intention and respectful behavior. If you approach someone with genuine respect, if you're attuned to their signals, if you're willing to gracefully accept their disinterest, you're not being creepy, you're being human. The fear of being creepy often stems from a lack of trust in yourself, from assuming the worst about your own intentions. But if your intentions are good, if you're approaching someone because you're genuinely interested in connecting, not because you're trying to possess or manipulate them, then trust yourself. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the role of fortune in human affairs. He acknowledged that sometimes circumstances are beyond our control, that sometimes things don't work out despite our best efforts. The same applies to conversations. Sometimes you'll approach someone and the conversation will be effortless and wonderful. Sometimes you'll approach someone and it will be awkward and brief. Sometimes external factors, things that have nothing to do with you, will determine the outcome. The key is not to take these variations personally, not to create elaborate stories about your own inadequacy based on random circumstances. One of the most powerful things you can do to overcome fear is to reframe failure. Machiavelli understood that every failure contains lessons, that setbacks are only truly defeats if you don't learn from them. When a conversation doesn't go well, you haven't failed at life. You've gathered data, you've practiced courage, you've proven to yourself that you can survive disappointment. Each time you approach someone despite your fear, you're building psychological resilience. You're teaching yourself that fear is not an accurate predictor of disaster. You're slowly reprogramming the part of your brain that equates social risk with danger. Here's something that might surprise you. Machiavelli, for all his reputation as cold and calculating, understood the importance of genuine emotion. He wrote that leaders who were purely strategic without any human warmth ultimately failed because people could sense the lack of authenticity. The same applies to conversations. If you approach every interaction as a strategic challenge to be solved, you'll miss the entire point. The goal is not to trick someone into liking you. The goal is to create an authentic moment of connection between two human beings. This requires vulnerability, not in the sense of dumping your problems on someone you just met, but in the sense of being genuinely yourself rather than a carefully constructed persona. Let me share something that Machiavelli understood about courage. It's not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Every time you approach someone despite feeling nervous, you're not conquering fear, you're proving that fear doesn't have to control your choices. This is infinitely more valuable than waiting to feel completely confident before taking action. Confidence is built through repeated action, not through waiting for the perfect internal state. The person who acts despite fear 100 times becomes genuinely confident. The person who waits to feel confident before acting remains paralyzed indefinitely. As we move toward the conclusion of this exploration, I want to emphasize something crucial. The principles we've discussed aren't about manipulation. They're about self-mastery. Machiavelli has been misunderstood for centuries as an advocate of cynical manipulation, but a careful reading of his work reveals something different. He was advocating for understanding reality as it is, not as we wish it to be, and then acting effectively within that reality. When it comes to conversation and connection, this means understanding that fear is natural, that rejection is survivable, that authenticity is more effective than performance, and that consistent action builds genuine confidence. So what does this look like in practice? It looks like the next time you see someone you'd like to talk to, you notice the fear, acknowledge it, and then act anyway. You walk up, you make eye contact, you smile, and you say something genuine. Maybe it's just hello. Maybe it's a comment about something you both can see. Maybe it's a genuine compliment. The specific words matter less than the intention behind them and your willingness to be present in the moment. And here's the beautiful truth that Machiavelli would appreciate. The more you do this, the easier it becomes. Not because the fear disappears completely, but because you build evidence that you can handle whatever happens. Each conversation, regardless of outcome, becomes proof that you're capable of courage. Each rejection becomes less significant because you know there will be more opportunities. Each positive interaction becomes more valuable because you know you created it through your own willingness to be vulnerable. The path to talking to anyone without crippling fear is not about learning tricks or memorizing lines. It's about fundamentally changing your relationship with fear itself, about understanding that fear is information rather than instruction, about building genuine self-worth that doesn't depend on any single person's response, and about practicing courage until it becomes a habit rather than an anomaly. Machiavelli faced exile, poverty, and the collapse of his political dreams, yet he continued to write, to think, to engage with the world. He understood that the alternative to courage is not safety but irrelevance. The same principle applies to your social life. The alternative to risking rejection is not comfort but loneliness. The alternative to vulnerable connection is not dignity but isolation. So take what you've learned here and use it. Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, but now. The next time you see someone who captures your interest, remember that your fear is just your brain trying to protect you from a threat that doesn't actually exist. Remember that you have every right to initiate a friendly conversation. Remember that rejection is data, not judgment. Remember that authenticity is more powerful than performance. And most importantly, remember that courage is built through action, one conversation at a time. If this exploration has resonated with you, if you've found value in seeing how ancient wisdom can illuminate modern challenges, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Your subscription helps us continue creating content that bridges timeless principles and contemporary struggles. And I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts and experiences. Have you struggled with this kind of fear? What strategies have worked for you? What questions do you still have? Leave a comment below and let's continue this conversation together. Because ultimately, that's what this is all about. Connection, growth, and the courage to be fully human in a world that often feels isolating. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next exploration.